I'd now like to pass on to a fantastic caving journalist and editor of a fantastic caving magazine, Descent. Chris Howe is going to talk about lighting darkness and cave photography and modern cave photography. He will probably be too shy to tell you that he recently won the International Caving Award for the best picture. So the best picture that's been taken in the last 4 years was awarded to Chris. So with that, I'll pass over to Chris.
I want to talk not so much about what happens today, but to pay some tribute to the pioneers that are long gone. We rely today on photography that has techniques that were worked out long ago. We kind of keep reinventing the wheel. We're able to produce images like these because we rely on modern techniques, modern technology. We've got lenses and cameras that will far exceed anything the pioneers used. We can attain things that they simply could not. This is some of my kit on a trip to Mulu. You can see we've got waterproof boxes, pelly cases. That's my flash gun box. I typically work with 2 boxes, one for the cameras, that's the camera end, one for the flash guns, that's the other end of the shot, and we can just very quickly split gear up and move it around. Waterproofing, it's great. This is in Meghalaya earlier this year. So wet, there was no wet. They get things out and put it down. We had a bamboo raft to float things on, just so we could open boxes. But the very fact that there's this much water around was not something viable to the guys of yesteryear. This is underwater lighting in use. Again, they didn't have these means. So I'm just going to turn the clock way back from photographing today into the days when it was engravings only. This is Porthoroghoff in South Wales. The only way in the early 1800s that you could depict anything was to draw it. Typically, you'd have someone go out, make a sketch of somewhere like this, today's Porthoroghoff, and then bring it back, typically to London, and an engraver would turn your sketch into something else. It didn't always turn out as accurately as this one from 1837. Within 2 years, this was supposed to be the same place. The river's going the wrong way. We got a bunch of pirates from somewhere well inland. I mean, it's utter fiction because there was often this translation between I suppose caves in the media, as David Rose was talking about. There's not always this translation from truth. So we'll get into 1839, when William Fox Talbot from Laycock Abbey announced his method of fixing light into a permanent medium and the invention of photography. And from then on, things were changing. I'm not going into the Frenchmen who got there slightly before, because the French don't count. We've established this. But Fox Talbot was related by marriage through to John Dilwyn Llywelyn. This was the son of someone who actually inherited a huge estate near Swansea on Gower. The estate itself is now destroyed. It's becoming reopened as a park. If you want to go there, you can see the rubble of the old house. You can still find his observatory. He was into science, and that's still standing. But John Dilwyn Llywelyn was a friend with Fox Talbot and was perhaps the first person to learn of Fox Talbot's techniques. Those techniques enabled him to go out onto Gower and experiment on his own. To get a photograph in those days, such as this one, it's the first picture of a cave in the world. And I think I can be confident with that, because at that time, no one else had the technique to be able to take a photo, and no one else was doing it away from home. John Dilwyn Llywelyn trots off down to Caswell Bay and gets a picture. To get images like this, Culver Hole down on Gower, you would have to carry everything you needed. So that meant your darkroom went with you. You had to have a tent. You had to have the chemicals as well as the camera. Your exposure times are in minutes. You had to prepare a glass plate. So that meant you poured liquid over it. It was ether-rich. That evaporated. Gave you a problem because once the ether's gone, you couldn't get the developer into the sensitive medium. So you had to be fairly fast. Do it on the spot. These guys had a couple of minutes to get the plate into the developer after exposure. If you went to a studio at that time, the important bit here, look at the ring over the seat. That's to keep the sitter's head still during the exposure. We are talking long exposures, and that's what was needed to get one photo in a studio. This is what you cart round the countryside. If you did go out, typically you'd be taking paired photos. These are stereo photos, if you haven't come across stereos, and this one's of Cheddar. Stereo photographs were viewed, a version in a cave, early cave entrance. Stereo photos are viewed through a viewer so that one eye saw each image. And a later image, just because it's a particularly good one to show it, you can see there the difference between those two images, so that your brain interprets this as 3D. It's as if you are seeing two pictures from one from each eye, so you get a 3D image. For underground work and flash work, we're going over to France, I'm afraid. Tunachon had a nickname, Félix Nadar. It was a pen name. He was a caricaturist. He was flamboyant. He'd had a studio in Paris. He was an amazing character. Having won the public over with his caricatures and penmanship, and he was very, very good, he decided to build a giant balloon. It captured the imagination. He also became the first person to be an explorer in the sense of taking aerial photographs over Paris. He was actually involved with the siege of Paris, where he photographed enemy lines until the balloon got away from him and it sailed off and he got captured and taken back. And it's a good story, look him up. His balloon itself was two-story. It had a darkroom hung beneath the basket. He'd have to climb out round the side to get back to his darkroom. And that carried on until he crashed it. Having done so, he got interested in the Paris catacombs, and it's still possible to go there on clandestine trips. It's illegal, but I know a lot of cavers do. There's a fairly regular Christmas trip that goes there. But the people of Paris did like going down for their trips into the catacombs. If you go there today, you can get in through that door, the one to the right, not the WC, and you can get into the catacombs yourself on a guided tour. Only it's not guided, you just get in there and have a wander through the bones. And it's quite interesting. You can turn up on a Sunday, pay your ticket, off you go. Nadar went in to produce, having done the first photographs in the air, he's now doing the first photographs below the ground. He had to prepare his plates and so on. People couldn't stand still. He used mannequins for his dummies and to get his images. For lighting, he was using arc lights. He was using great big long cables run in from the surface to power these things with Bunsen batteries. You couldn't reproduce these pictures in the print. There was no way of doing anything about photographs other than getting a raw photograph and sticking it on the page. So it's going to be a long time yet before you can see reproductions. You've got drawings made from photographs still in print. Also popular was a gathering, and you went into the sewers. They'd only just finished making those. So you'd have people down in there. He'd want to photograph the sewers as well. And he won world acclaim with this. These were exhibited in Britain. They went to Crystal Palace, all sorts of places, and he was feted for the productions that he achieved. But arc lights are not a great source. You can't drag arc lights around caves, particularly convenient. Limelight, how about that? That was being used in projectors and theatres. It was hot. There's more than one theatre that burnt down because they tried lighting it with naked flames or with with limelight. Limelight was produced by piping in hydrogen and oxygen through two pipes. You get an oxyhydrogen flame that heated a lump of calcium that you turned on clockwork to keep the heating even. That glowed. That was your limelight. And of course, in theatres, you're in the limelight. For the real advances, we're going to shift over to Bunsen, of Bunsen burner, and a colleague, Henry Roscoe. And Roscoe was a Manchester man. The pair of them prepared the first isolation of magnesium. And magnesium, when it first appeared, that was this wonder stuff. People would hold soirees. They'd black out a room so that they could burn the stuff and make it as light as day, which they'd had if they opened the windows. These two people were photographed in Manchester at one of the Literary and Philosophical Society meetings. Brewster, he's the one that invented the stereo viewer. Fox Talbot there on the right, inventor of photography. And these were taken by a chap who was a working class man, a photographer in Manchester, Alfred Brothers. And Brothers thought this magnesium, that was kind of cool stuff. He got hold of a mass of it, put it through a mangle to get ribbon, because he found that ribbon burnt better than wire that had previously been put through essentially a meat grinder that forced it out like you get mincemeat. He took it to this place in the Blue John Caverns. The contraption on the right there is a candelabra that could be hoisted up into the ceiling so that it would illuminate it for tourists. So there is the first cave photograph by artificial light in the world. And that's Brothers' breath coming in from the left. It was kind of a lowly start, but he had shown the way. We're going to shift next to the next one of these pioneers, who was the Astronomer Royal for Scotland. This is the Scottish Observatory, Charles Piazzi Smythe. Now, where Nadar was flamboyant, Smith was a nutter. Smith had world renown for his capability of measuring things, of observing things as astronomer. But then, this is a later book that he wrote about the pyramid, he got into his head the writings and hypotheses of John Taylor that he dedicated this book to. At the time, we're back to the French meter was having inroads. And lots of people in Britain didn't like that. The foot was going to be king. We don't want the meter, we want imperial. John Taylor had got a hypothesis that the foot was a divine measurement because it very closely matched some measurements in the Bible. Not only that, they discovered, the pyramids were built on a measurement very close to the foot, therefore the foot, again, was divine. And the pyramids must have been built by, oh, God. So let's go to Egypt and photograph the pyramids. We might think that today's cameras are modern in design. Smith had this one built for him. The bit on the right there is a removable back. The problem you had in the deserts of Egypt was it's hot, it's dusty, there's flies, it's foul. And people who were trying to coat a plate for photography were getting flies stuck in it. They were getting problems. So Smith had this developed. No longer does he going to have to make his plates on the spot. He just switches the back, and the back is filled with ether, and that kept the microscope slide, which was his glass plate, kept it moist. So this is the sort of photograph that he was getting. You can see the rain of sparks each side from magnesium ribbon. The people, of course, are getting up and walking away. They're getting bored during the exposures. That's his wife, Jessie, in the background, Arabs in the front. He thought they were heathens because they couldn't understand him. But when he came back to Britain and started doing lecture tours, he was lauded again. You know, it's practical to obtain better photographs at night than it was formerly procured by the light of day. It'll be next to impossible for a mortal man to hide himself from the lens of a photographer. Formerly, we were safe after sunset. That's so no longer. Smith, when he died, is buried underneath a pyramid. This is in Ripon Churchyard. He wanted to be buried with his camera for Judgment Day. That wasn't followed through. Next stage, we're going to go over to Mammoth Cave. Mammoth was somewhere where you went as a tourist, you wrote your name on the wall or the ceiling, but photography was nevertheless there to record these visits. These are some of the original cave explorers, black guides, who were slave guides at the time. This is Matt Branson and Stephen Bishop. This is Bishop's gravestone in Kentucky. You can see there, first guide and explorer of the Mammoth Cave. They penetrated an awful long way in. Kentucky is a border state between North and South in the States. It was one of the subjective areas during the Confederate War. The North won, of course, slavery lost. After the war, we've got a situation where people wanted to have tourism return to the area. Oh, let's advertise Mammoth. You go to Mammoth Cave on the train. Many of the railroads were putting in railway lines purely because there were caves somewhere along the route. It was a reason to go down this valley, not that valley. What this doesn't reveal is that it only got you to a day's stagecoach ride away. The railway didn't actually get to Mammoth Cave for a long time after this. But the owners or the licensees of photography at Mammoth wanted to get pictures to encourage people to come. And they employed the services of this guy, who was a Belgian immigrant, Charles Waldack. And Waldack is really significant. He built himself a magnesium burner. That's it on the left. A chimney to take the fumes away, a reflector in the front. He had 3 of these that he took into the cave with his stereo photography. Waldack in the center, his employers either side, Proctor and O'Shaughnessy. And we're in 1866. This is a year after Brothers has taken his first photograph. And the photographs that Waldack produced were astoundingly good for the time. And let's bear in mind, he was burning several ounces of magnesium per picture. He could only take 1 image at a time on some of these expeditions. This is one of them. We're talking about 36-hour expeditions into the cave to take these pictures. And the problem there is you get fumes off magnesium. This is floating across the roof. But again, lauded, this was the photographic press. Is not photography a great power? What else could creep into the bowels of the earth and bring forth such pictures? These such pictures carried on. This is Sessa in 1886, carrying on this process of photographing underground, releasing it to the public. It was typically show caves. This is a consumptive's hut. Someone had the bright idea, Dr. Krogan, if you went into the clean air of a cave, if you had TB, you would get better. It actually just meant you went down there, got cold, didn't get better, and died underground. These are the saltpeter vats from the American War of Independence in 1812. If you go to Mammoth, you can still see the remains of them. These are the tree trunks hollowed out to make pipes to carry the effluents. Magnesium ribbon, then, was getting automated. You could run it by clockwork. So this is a magnesium ribbon burner. And then someone had the bright idea of getting flash. These are all still long exposures. At best, you'd get a magnesium ribbon burning for maybe 30 seconds or a minute. It's too long to freeze motion. Let's try for a flash. Let's get magnesium powder, pour it through a funnel, through essentially a carbide-like flame. And you've got a flash. It still lasted seconds and made a mess of your parlor, but it kind of worked. Or the DIY approach. Let's get a churchwarden pipe, fill it with magnesium powder, put cotton wool around the outside, soak it in ether, light it, and blow. Can you imagine what's going to happen to your eyebrows? So let's go 1 step up. Let's fill these things with magnesium powder, light the burners, and start pumping the bellows. And they did burn down Sydney Opera House like this. There we go. Let's have multiple outlets. You filled the whole of that tray with burning alcohol and put the spout in your mouth and blew. These are amazing contraptions. What was needed is much faster flash. That meant getting magnesium metal powder and an oxidizing agent. Georg and Meith in Germany produced this chemical combination. You ground this stuff up, and having said that, that meant a few people in the States lost their lives because they didn't get the idea that you ground them up, then mixed them. If you mixed them, then grind them up, it had a different effect. Someone chucked away a bottle of stored flash powder. We're talking about production. He dropped it on the floor. It flattened a row of houses in Philadelphia. It killed 3 people. This stuff is 4 times the power of gunpowder. If you get it damp and it dries, it increases its explosive power. But it was an instantaneous flash. So the first flash powders coming out, first flash photographs coming out of Germany, you can see how sharp they are, because suddenly you've got the ability to freeze that motion. Whereas this, one of Sessa's pictures, 1886, you can see movement in the person. Within a short time, we've got someone called Ben Hayes popping his head up, and this is his list of photographs, and right at the bottom you can see cave photographer. He's specializing in this and relying on flash powder to do his work. These are pronounced the very best specimens of subterranean photography yet produced, a quote from Scientific American that he used widely. But his pictures now arrest motion. Commercially, flash powder was released in 2 parts. Again, you mix them together by shaking them up, and you've got what it called absolutely smokeless flashlight powder. Actually, you got the flash, then you got the smoke. It just meant you didn't get the smoke at the same time as the flash. You still only got to take 1 photo before the place is full. Martel, we've seen before. He was busy doing things like descending Padarac, taking or having photos taken for him. He was quite adept at taking the credit for what other people did. Someone called Gopale did this picture. Here he's descending, or about to ascend, Gaping Gill. And he did produce the first manual of cave photography in 1903. Photography spread. It's used in show caves everywhere. We've got magnesium burners here being typically used at Genolan just to show the tourists around. At the Grotte de Hon in Belgium, they were advertising, they want people to come. This is a postcard, sort of economical with the truth. The formation is 3 foot high. That's someone drawn on. In Britain, this is the Kinder Club at Blue John. You can see the contraptions they're using for lighting. And if you look carefully along the front, there's the box thing. That's a limelight burner. The cylinders are oxygen and hydrogen to run it. And this is how exploration was going. Martel came over to Britain on Mendip. He's there, signing his name in 1904 as having visited the place, saying how wonderful it is. His impression in caving in his campaigns in France was you had to have photographs. No photograph meant that it wasn't properly explored. You had no way of proving what you said was there to the public. Everything had to be photographed, and that rubbed off on Mendip. This is what you needed to descend Eastwater. That was to get to the bottom of Eastwater as it was then and out again. And it had to have a camera because you had to record it. So Harry Savory, when he began his work, and it was absolutely superb. We're into 1910, 1912, and through into the early 20s. It was wonderful. And though it's still flash powder, and look at the fumes. This is Speedwell. It's a problem. If you want to contain the fumes, people tried things like muslin bags. It wasn't very successful. And very, very briefly, here is the concept. This is how the world's first underwater photographs were taken. You've got a barrel of air so that you could run a bell jar with a flame in it, and then you pressed the bulb, squirted magnesium powder into the flame, you got a flash, hauled it all up to the surface to reload. But it was a contained flash, essentially a flash bulb. So this is magnesium sheets inside a bulb. That soon became other sorts. The tiny little thing is an AG3. That's the sort of bulb that I'm still using today. Tex Helm got the idea. We're into the 50s. He loaded up multiple cameras, laid miles of cable in Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, and fired off that much for one image. He was sponsored by Sylvania, and this was advertising. We're into caves now still for advertising. It's the power of flash. National Geographic put his picture center page. So today, I'm still using flash bulbs. I still find them useful. They're small, they're waterproof, they're powerful. This is an image from Meghalaya this year. As is this. Different colors coming out of the water according to what there is. I mean, is it peaty and red? Is it clean and green? We have our own techniques that we think we are inventing. Martel invented them. Actually, Waldeck invented them. You go far enough back, Waldeck was the one who was laying down many of the tenets that we rely on today. Get the flash away from the camera. We've got modern equipment that gets us into tighter places where we can photograph the sport. We've got the beauty of our own caves from Knots. We've got places such as this, Mulu. We're exploring around the world. We're recording these images. We can do it with modern equipment, but I do think that out of all the wonderful photographs that I keep seeing this weekend, I've seen again and again and again the superb work of loads of people. We should remember how all these guys started, how we got to where we are today. Thank you.